I was 21 years old the day I realized I had to choose between remaining invisible or becoming unforgettable. My name is Ella Montgomery, and this is the story of how I destroyed the people who tried to destroy me, not with anger, but with patience, intelligence, and an unwavering knowledge of their deepest weaknesses. It began on an ordinary Tuesday, with my father's wedding announcement. I was 14 when Mother died. Pneumonia. Quick. Merciless. For 3 years, it was just Father and me, quiet dinners, his gentle laughter, the way he'd ruffle my hair when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He was a successful businessman, kind-hearted to a fault, and utterly naive about people who didn't share his integrity. That's why Victoria Ashford was so easy for him to trust. She arrived in our lives like a calculated storm. Elegant. Charming. Everything she did seemed designed specifically to make my father believe she was exactly what we needed. I was 17 when they got married. I watched from the second-floor landing as Victoria glided down our staircase in a white gown that cost more than my entire bedroom, my father gazing at her like she'd invented love. It should have been beautiful. It wasn't. Victoria brought Clara with her, her biological daughter from a previous marriage. Clara was 18, polished, and carried her mother's cruelty like a genetic gift. Within weeks, the dynamic in our home shifted. My father seemed to disappear into his work, traveling more frequently, spending longer hours at the office. At first, I thought it was the honeymoon period ending. I was naive. It was worse than that. Victoria had systematically isolated him. The first year was death by 1,000 cuts. Clara would mock my appearance at family dinners, "The dress is so last season, Ella," while Victoria smiled sweetly and said nothing. When I tried to join their conversations, I was met with polite dismissals. When I mentioned my university applications, Victoria would squeeze my father's hand and suggest I was putting too much pressure on myself. He'd nod absently, his attention already on her. My invisibility was not an accident. It was a strategy. By 18, I was the household ghost. I'd cook meals that everyone ate while Victoria reminded them I'd been so helpful. I'd organize events that she'd take credit for. I'd listen to them mock my dreams while I stood in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I washed their dishes. The night before my 20th birthday, Victoria left an emerald bracelet on my pillow, a gift from my father, she said. It was beautiful and utterly impersonal. She'd chosen it. Signed his name. He hadn't even remembered. I sat on my bed, looking at that bracelet, and I felt something shift inside me. A door opening. A line being drawn. That's when I understood, remaining invisible was no longer survival. It was a choice. And I was done choosing it. I started small. Information gathering. For 2 years, I moved through our house like water, present but unnoticed. I listened. I watched. I learned. The first thing I discovered was Victoria's affair. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was home early from my job. I'd finally escaped the house by landing a position at a marketing firm, though Victoria had made sure it paid less than it should have. I'd seen her recommendation letter to my employer. Ella is competent, though perhaps not leadership material. I came through the side gate to avoid running into them in the foyer, and that's when I saw him. A man in an expensive suit, pressing Victoria against the garden wall. Their kiss was hungry, desperate, full of the kind of passion my father would never recognize. My heart hammered. My stomach twisted. But I didn't run. I watched. I memorized his face. His car. The way he texted her afterward, casual, assumptive. The way she laughed, throwing her head back like she owned the world. That secret was my first weapon. I didn't know how I'd use it yet. But I'd learned something crucial about Victoria. She wasn't invincible. She was just careful. And careful people make mistakes. The second discovery was Clara's financial reality. She bragged constantly about her successful consulting practice and her investment portfolio. But I'd seen her credit card statements, left carelessly on the kitchen counter, and I'd heard her on the phone with creditors, voice high and panicked. Clara was drowning in debt, and her mother was propping her up with money that, I later discovered, came from increasingly questionable sources. The third discovery was Victoria's professional vulnerability. My father had retired 2 years into the marriage, giving Victoria access to his business accounts temporarily. She'd convinced him she wanted to understand his legacy. What she'd actually done was redirect funds, hide income, and create what looked suspiciously like money laundering through a series of charity accounts. I documented everything. Photographs of documents. Screenshots of transactions. Dates. Amounts. Names. I created a private journal, encrypted, hidden, and filled it with their secrets like I was collecting evidence for a trial. Because that's what I was doing. By my 21st birthday, I had something they didn't even know they'd given me, power. The turning point came when my father got sick. A heart attack. Minor, the doctors said, but enough to scare him. Enough to make him step back and actually look at his life for the first time in 3 years. He was in the hospital for a week. I was there every day. Victoria came twice. Clara came once. My father noticed. He didn't say anything, but I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of awareness, like he was seeing through a fog he hadn't known was there. When he came home, something had shifted. He wanted to spend time with me. Real time. He'd ask about my job, my friends, my dreams. He'd apologize for being distant. He'd started noticing things, the way Victoria spoke to me, the way Clara smirked when I entered a room. But it was too late. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair easily. And I was no longer the kind person who would let him repair it. I needed him to see. So I let him. I started leaving things where he'd find them. Not obviously. A receipt for Victoria's lover's hotel stay, accidentally left on the desk. A text message visible on her phone when she'd stepped away. A conversation I overheard from down the hall about how easily my father's money is flowing. I never lied. I simply made sure the truth found him. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening. I was in my room when I heard his voice, louder than I'd heard it in years. Victoria. Explain this. Explain all of it. She tried. She was good at it, mixing truth with lies, playing the victim, suggesting he was paranoid. But his heart attack had given him clarity. He didn't believe her. When he asked about the affair, she didn't deny it. She justified it. You were never here. You were always working. What did you expect? I heard him say, very quietly, I expected you to be honest. That night, he slept in the guest room. The next morning, he asked me to come to his study. He looked old. Broken. But also aware. Ella, I need you to tell me the truth, he said. All of it. And I did. I showed him the documents I'd compiled. The transactions. The dates. The timeline of Victoria's affair. I explained, calmly and carefully, what I'd discovered about the charity accounts and the redirected funds. My father listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he sat very still for a long time. How long have you known? He asked. Over a year, I said. But I needed to be sure. He looked at me differently after that. Not with anger. With something like regret. I should have listened to you. Before. Yes, I said. You should have. Victoria and Clara didn't see it coming because they'd never believed I could touch them. My father had always been gentle with his business dealings, but he wasn't stupid. Within a week, he'd hired a forensic accountant. Within 2 weeks, the truth was undeniable. Victoria had embezzled nearly $2 million through the charity accounts. Clara had helped her, moving money through fake consulting invoices. He didn't go to the police. Not yet. Instead, he did something more devastating. He told them he knew. The confrontation happened in the living room. I watched from the kitchen doorway as my father, standing tall despite his recent heart attack, looked at the two women who'd tried to break him and said, simply, "I'm freezing your accounts. I'm filing for divorce. And I'm giving the forensic evidence to the authorities tomorrow unless you both agree to my terms." Victoria's face went white. Clara started to cry. "What terms?" Victoria demanded, her voice shaking. "You leave this house," my father said. "Today. You take nothing but your personal belongings. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. And you never contact Ella again. If you agree to these terms, I'll give you 48 hours before I contact the police. If you don't, I go to them immediately." Victoria tried to argue. She tried to manipulate. She tried to play the victim. But my father wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at me, standing in the kitchen doorway, and in his eyes was the realization that his daughter had saved him. "Pack your bags," he said to Victoria. "You have 2 hours." They were gone by sunset. What happened next wasn't the dramatic explosion everyone expects in revenge stories. It was quieter. More complete. Victoria and Clara's departure triggered a cascade of consequences they couldn't stop. My father's lawyer informed them that the forensic evidence would be turned over to the authorities if they violated the agreement. Victoria's social circle evaporated, word travels fast among the wealthy, and nobody wants to associate with an embezzler. Clara's consulting clients quietly terminated their contracts. Victoria's lover, terrified of being dragged into the scandal, disappeared. 6 months later, Victoria and Clara were charged. Not with major crimes, my father had negotiated carefully, but enough to give them criminal records. Victoria received probation and mandatory restitution. Clara received the same, plus a year of community service. More importantly, they lost their social position. The life they'd built on cruelty and theft unraveled silently, invisibly, the way they'd tried to make me disappear. But here's what surprised me: I felt nothing like I expected. I thought I'd feel triumph. Vindication. Instead, I felt tired. My father moved through the house like a man waking from a nightmare. He was kind to me, yes, but also distant, grieving the years he'd lost to his own blindness. We never really recovered the relationship we'd had before Victoria. Something had broken there, and even knowing it was her fault, even having justice served, didn't fix it. That's the thing about revenge that nobody tells you: it doesn't give you back what was taken. It just prevents them from taking anything more. I spent the next year rebuilding my life. I moved into my own apartment. I got promoted at work, not because Victoria had sabotaged me, but because I was actually good at what I did. I went back to university and finished the degree I'd put on hold. I made real friends, people who saw me as I actually was, not as a shadow to be dismissed. My father eventually realized that I'd saved him not out of love, but out of necessity. That stung him more than the betrayal. But slowly, carefully, we started to heal. He never asked me how I'd known to gather that evidence, or how long I'd been preparing. He understood, I think, that some questions didn't have answers he wanted to hear. A year after Victoria and Clara left, my father and I were having tea in the garden, the same garden where I'd watched her meet her lover. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for being strong enough to survive all of this. I'm ashamed it took me so long to see." I looked at him, this man who'd loved the wrong person, who'd let himself be blinded by charm and beauty. He was just human. Flawed. Vulnerable to the same weaknesses we all are. "I survived because I had to," I said. And I did what I did because I loved you. Even when I was so angry I could barely breathe. He reached over and took my hand. For the first time in years, it felt like connection. Real connection. Not invisible. Not forgotten. What did you learn? He asked. From all of this? I thought about it carefully. About the years I spent watching. About the cold patience I'd cultivated. About becoming someone who could hurt others without flinching. I learned that darkness is always present, I said. In people, in situations, in ourselves. But I also learned that silence can be a weapon, and patience can be powerful. I learned that the person nobody notices can see everything. I paused, then added the truth I'd been afraid to speak aloud. But I also learned that living in that darkness, even to fight darkness, changes you. I won the war, Dad. But part of me is still trapped in that mansion, watching and waiting and collecting secrets. I'm not sure I know how to be anything else anymore. My father squeezed my hand. Then we'll learn together. Victoria and Clara moved to another city, somewhere on the East Coast, where nobody knew their names. According to the single piece of social media I allowed myself to check, Victoria works in retail now. Clara lives with her mother and hasn't had a job in months. They're alive. They're free. They're just not powerful anymore. Some might say that's not enough revenge. That they should have gone to prison, should have suffered more, should have had their entire lives destroyed the way they tried to destroy mine. But those people haven't learned what I learned. Revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. It's about taking the invisibility they forced upon you and transforming it into vision. Into clarity. Into power they never see coming. I've built a good life now. A real one. I have a career I'm proud of. A father I'm slowly reconnecting with. Friends who see me. A partner who loves me not because I'm useful, but because I'm valuable. The scars from those years are still there. I'm not naive enough to think you can endure something like that without carrying marks. But they've faded from open wounds to old reminders of survival. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I think about Ella, that invisible girl in her stepmother's house, watching and waiting and burning with a rage she couldn't express. I think about how she transformed that rage into something cold and brilliant and ultimately, absolutely, undeniably powerful. I'm grateful for her. For what she survived. For what she refused to become. But I'm more grateful for who I became after her. Because that's the real revenge story. Not the destruction of your enemies. The triumph of yourself. On my 23rd birthday, my father gave me back the emerald bracelet Victoria had gifted me years ago. He'd had it appraised. It was costume jewelry. Worth maybe $50. I laughed. Of course it was. But I kept it anyway. Not as a reminder of Victoria's cruelty, but as proof of her smallness. She tried so hard to diminish me with hollow gifts and calculated cruelty, and in the end, it was all just performance. All just glass glittering under insufficient light. I don't wear the bracelet. But sometimes I hold it, and I remember that girl I was, the one who thought invisibility was her only choice. She was wrong. She always had choices. And the choice I made was to become someone even I never expected. Strong. Seen. Free. Finally, undeniably free. I learned something in that house while I was invisible: respect is non-negotiable. Not because anyone will give it to you freely, but because you can't survive without giving it to yourself first. They didn't respect me, not when they had the power to dismiss me. But silence taught me that invisibility is only a prison if you treat it as one. I used mine as a watchtower. I saw everything because they believed I saw nothing. If you've been gaslit into invisibility, I want you to know, your silence doesn't make you weak. It makes you observant. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. They make you necessary. Your survival doesn't make you vindictive. It makes you extraordinary. I turned humiliation into evidence, patience into power, and my own erasure into the clarity to see who I needed to become. That's not revenge. That's reclamation. This is the revolution, deciding right now that your worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered. Share this with someone still trapped in their own mansion. Tell them the person nobody notices will always be the one who sees everything. Subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries, finding your voice, and transforming humiliation into triumph. Your ending isn't written by them. It's written by you.